So here's a question for you. Do you want to be happy? Seriously. You want to be happy, do you? Chances are if you ask 100 people in a room that same question, all 100 of them are going to raise their hands if they're being honest. The fact is, happiness and the need and desire for happiness is built into the human condition. We all want to be happy. If you doubt that, ask the question backwards. How many people do you know whose stated purpose in life is to be unhappy? I think the answer will present itself. The problem is, if everybody in the world is seeking after happiness, why are so few people finding it or able to hang on to it? The problem is we seek happiness as an object, something to be grasped and held on to, when in point of fact, happiness is a byproduct of something else. And it's that something else I want to talk about for a few minutes in this short video. In the small town where I live, we have an old-fashioned main street with old glass-fronted brick buildings and an old movie theater dating back probably to the 1920s or 30s with a lighted marquee outside. Next to it is a candy store, and on Saturday mornings they close off the main street in summer, the north end of it, for a farmer's market. And the vendors set up their stalls for their fruit and vegetables and so forth. A short time ago I was in the candy store one Saturday morning and couldn't help but notice a mother and two young children in there. A little girl probably about 4 and a boy maybe 6 years old. In my world, you do not take 6-year-old boys into candy stores, but it wasn't my little boy, so I wasn't going to worry about it. At any rate, this little boy was really making a fuss. He wanted everything on every shelf and in every jar. He was just begging and squealing for candy until finally his mother relented and bought him a bag of gummy bears. But she said, "You can't have them until we get outside." That might have been the end of the story, but it wasn't, because I saw them as I was wandering through the stalls for the farmer's market a short time later. They were sitting on a bench and the little boy was literally stuffing his face with gummy bears, and he had the most satisfied expression on his face that you can imagine. The story didn't end there, however, either. At the north end of our main street we have a little city park, and as I was walking home a little bit later through the park, I noticed the mother and her two children again. This time the mother and the daughter were sitting on the park bench, and the little boy was jumping up and down. No gummy worms, there was no candy left in sight, and in fact he was throwing a temper tantrum. His fists were clenched, he was red in the face, and he was jumping up and down and screaming. It occurred to me that the candy was gone and the sugar high wore off. That settled in for me as a trajectory, really. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's a pattern that I've seen before. We desire something and crave it. We seek to obtain it. Once we obtain it, we devour it. And after we devour it, we're left with the consequences or the letdown afterwards. So the point is, we're all just like that 6-year-old boy in how we go about seeking happiness. In effect, what we're really doing is trying to manipulate our mood. And that never lasts. The other side of that coin is trying to control our circumstances. If you look at your Bible in Genesis chapter 3, the story is told there of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God said you can have the whole garden. Everything in it is yours, with one exception. You're not to eat from the tree in the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Needless to say, Satan came along, speaking through a serpent, and he put doubt into Eve's mind and caused her in a way, or triggered something in her that caused her to desire something more than she already had. When she saw that the fruit was good to eat and pleasant to the eye, she was no longer content with what she had. She took some of the fruit, which the Bible tells us was good to eat. She ate it, gave some to her husband who ate it. They found out it tasted good until it hit their stomach and poisoned them, and sin entered the world. So what's the point of all this? Well, the point is, in the world, in our what the Bible calls our sin nature, or in the material world, in our flesh, we have built in to us certain reactions and certain instincts. We seek happiness in one of two ways, both of which are counterfeit. We try to manipulate our mood through sex, drugs, rock and roll, or whatever substitutes for that in our life. It might be risk-taking, shopping, it might be stealing to get some kind of a high off that. It might be a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend. Whatever gives us that glow is what we seek after. Once we attain it, we devour it, enjoy it, and then we find out that the elevated mood doesn't last and we're in for a letdown, and then we start the process all over. The second way that we seek happiness, I believe, is by controlling our circumstances. We want a better job, a better car, a better house. We want to be better looking, and that's a big one. How much money are plastic surgeons making these days, particularly off women trying to enhance their beauty, but also off men trying to maintain their youth and so forth. This is all a matter of trying to line up our chess pieces on the chessboard and then keep them in perfect order. It doesn't happen that way, and it doesn't work that way. It's not lasting. It leads to a little bit of a sugar high, but it doesn't bring true peace, joy, and contentment. So the question is, what does? Well, the good news is I actually know the answer. And the answer will bore you at first until we dig into it a little bit deeper. But the answer to true peace and joy and contentment is character. And character comes from persistently doing things God's way, according to His principles. The Bible tells us in, I want to say it's in Isaiah 26, roughly verse 3. And there's a principle here. It tells us that God will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is fixed on God. So if you want to keep your mind fixed on God to obtain this blessing of perfect peace, what does that look like? Quite frankly, it looks like doing things God's way. If we persist in trying to make ourselves happy by manipulating our mood, that's really the fountainhead of addiction. If we try to bring ourselves happiness by controlling the circumstances of our life, that leads to obsession in one degree or another. And neither one of them are going to last We can't control all the circumstances of life. Nobody can. Jesus even tells us, in the world there's going to be trouble. But then he goes on, he says, but don't worry about it. I've overcome the world. I used to think, as a lot of Christians do, that it was God's job to fix all my circumstances and give me everything I wanted, sooner or later. I wasn't in a rush. I figured it might take him some time. But the fact is, God's not going to fix our circumstances. Here's the principle in the punchline. God intends to use our circumstances as Christians to fix our character. And with proper character, our circumstances will never, ever, ever overwhelm us, rob us of our joy, rob us of our peace, or knock us off stride for any extended period of time, as long as we remain fixed and focused on God and on his principles. If this is a true thing, that it's God's intent to rebuild us so that the circumstances of life can't throw us off stride or rob us of our peace, then he's going to use those circumstances in the building process. And rather than try and escape from the problems of life by running to sex, drugs, rock and roll, or trying to control our circumstances, we can actually embrace the problems and the circumstances of life. And the key to that is to not react, but to step back, choose a proper attitude, act from that proper attitude, and then really trust God with the results. God gives us so many promises of blessings as Christians that I've never even tried to count them. The Bible is overflowing with promises of goodness that God has in store for us. But you know what? Most, if not all, of those promises are conditional. And they're conditional on a real ugly word. That ugly word is obedience. We don't like to be told we have to obey. But Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. Here's the good news. Obeying God to obtain his blessings and out of devotion to God is not burdensome. God is not up there waiting with a sharp stick to poke us in the eye every time we get it wrong. This isn't a forced march where somebody's got a gun behind us, behind our back, and is marching behind us. Rather, it's following Jesus, and he leads from the front. So the key to happiness and peace and contentment really is to find out what God's principles are, and they're all outlined in the Bible. Actually not outlined, they're in detail. How things work in his kingdom as opposed to how they work in the world system. We need to be students of the Bible. We need to trust God and follow Jesus out of devotion. If we do that and remain focused on him and stop trying to manipulate our mood, stop trying to control our circumstances, accepting the circumstances of life and embracing them as discipline, not punishment, but as character building tools, we will find that the byproduct of all that is exactly what God says it is. He will keep us in perfect peace and contentment. Thanks for watching.